For a show titled Star Trek, it sure has told an awful lot of time travel stories over the years, huh? Every Star Trek TV series and 4 of the 13 feature films has featured time travel. In fact, so many characters from all eras of the franchise have time traveled and wreaked so much havoc in the past, present, and future that I feel compelled to ask the question, who is actually Star Trek's most reckless time traveler? Because God knows there are plenty of candidates. No, not him, the real God. Thank you. It's not just that time travel is a frequently used trope in Star Trek. Some of the most popular and critically acclaimed episodes in the whole franchise are time travel episodes. Makes you wonder why they didn't just go for it and make a show called Time Trek. Side note, I'm a little disappointed no one ever made that show, to be honest. Not only is it a solid premise, and if you doubt that, check out Legends of Tomorrow. It's a show about a team of time-traveling superheroes, and it's awesome. Time Trek is an amazing title! How has that never been the title of anything other than an obscure 1970s video game? Sure, in 1993 there was Time Trax, which is close, and is also undoubtedly the crowning achievement in the career of Dale Midkiff. Respect. But that has nothing to do with Star Trek. And is this series called Trax, actually? I don't think so. Was Time Trax really 25 years ago already? Wow. Anyway, so who might be Star Trek's most reckless time traveler? Given the subject matter, it seems only fitting that we proceed chronologically and begin with the series that takes place the earliest in Star Trek's fictional timeline, Enterprise. At first glance, this series would seem to feature several promising candidates. Thanks to a recurring subplot about a temporal Cold War, the first 3 seasons are chock full of time travel. Crewman Daniels turns out to be a temporal agent from the 31st century. Captain Archer travels into the future a few times. Archer and T'Pol travel back to 2004 in the episode Carpenter Street. The whole ship gets yanked back to World War II for the end of Season 3 and the start of Season 4. But this video isn't about Star Trek's most prolific time traveler, it's about the most reckless time traveler. And while Archer and the crew of his Enterprise did quite a bit of time traveling, they always did so to correct temporal incursions, to restore history that had been altered. Archer wasn't being reckless, he was striving to put right what once went wrong, hoping each time that his next leap would be the leap home. Still would have been a better ending than These Are the Voyages. The next Trek series, according to the franchise's in-story chronology, is Discovery. I'm not going to say much about Discovery in this video because at the time of this recording, we're only about halfway through the show's 2nd season. The first season featured a bit of time travel, a time loop episode featuring Harry Mudd, and a time jump near the end of the season when the crew comes 9 months into the future while returning from the Mirror Universe, but nothing that really qualifies as reckless. The 2nd season's major ongoing story arc involves a mysterious time-traveling Red Angel, but it's not over yet, so I'm gonna wait and see how this one turns out. What about classic Trek? It not only originated the whole damn Star Trek franchise, it also established that time travel was no big deal. Captain Kirk and the crew of the classic Enterprise time traveled by accident in The Naked Time and Tomorrow Is Yesterday, both Season 1 episodes, and by the end of Season 2, they'd gotten the hang of it so well, they were nonchalantly time-warping back to the 20th century to conduct historical research. It's easy to forget just how casually time travel is handled in that episode, Assignment Earth, probably because Star Trek never treated the subject that way again. When the crew traveled back to the 20th century again in the film Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, it was treated as an incredibly dangerous operation, which they were lucky to survive. How did time travel go from routine to incredibly dangerous? Easy. Routine time travel is boring, and incredibly dangerous time travel is dramatic and exciting. So the writers of Star Trek IV just ignored the previously established fact that time travel was super easy and did what was best for their story. It's almost as if the creators of Star Trek have treated its in-universe history as malleable rather than immutable since the beginning, and have always felt at liberty to ignore, add to, or otherwise alter parts of it as they saw fit to serve the needs of the story they were telling at the time, and fans who are upset with the producers of Star Trek Discovery for supposedly pissing all over canon should just get over it. They should just get over it. Where was I? Oh yeah. None of this is to say that classic Trek doesn't have any candidates for most reckless time traveler. I can definitely think of one. It's not his fault, he's tweaked out on cordrazine, but even so, Dr. McCoy jumps through the talking time donut and changes history so the Nazis win World War II and the Federation never exists. If not for Kirk and Spock following him back and stopping him from saving that nice lady from getting pancaked by a truck, we'd all be speaking German and fascists would be running this country. Thanks to Kirk and Spock, we're not speaking German. I don't want to be too hard on McCoy, though. When he travels back to 1986 with the rest of the crew in Star Trek IV, he does have his wits about him, and he cautions Scotty about giving away the formula for transparent aluminum because it would change the future. That's responsible time traveling. Doesn't do any good. Scotty's just like, whatever, for all I know, Arnold Ripner over here invented it. History schmistery. But the thought is appreciated nonetheless, Doctor. Let's move on to Star Trek The Next Generation. The TNG crew weren't a very reckless bunch. Picard is so concerned about preserving the timeline that he even makes Q promise that only his own personal history will be changed when he's sent back to the past in the episode Tapestry. Though he's not always so careful. I don't think you went back and collected all those blinky things you stashed in the lamps of 19th century San Francisco, did you, Jean-Luc? And where'd you get those anyway? Did you bring them from the 24th century? That's what I call planning for the future. Or the past. Whatever, you know what I mean. That lapse aside, Picard may have done a bit of time traveling, but he's definitely not a serious contender for most reckless. In fact, compared to the rest of the franchise, the Next Gen crew's experience with time travel is relatively slight. Other than that Times Arrow two-parter that bridged seasons 5 and 6, there's no episode that features all or most of the main cast on a time travel adventure. There are what we might call minor time travel excursions, like in the episode Cause and Effect, where the ship is caught up in a time loop that forces them to relive the same day over and over again, or We'll Always Have Paris, where they experience brief temporal distortions aboard the ship as they approach a lab where a scientist is conducting time experiments, or the series finale, All Good Things, where Q sends Picard bouncing back and forth between past, present, and future in an attempt to stop a temporal anomaly that destroys all life on Earth. No big deal. The Enterprise itself doesn't do any significant time traveling until the film Star Trek First Contact. And the Enterprise E crew aren't exactly careful about avoiding contact with the locals when they get to the 21st century, but they don't really have a choice. Their mission is to prevent the Borg from altering Earth's history, and by the time they get there, the Borg have already seriously damaged the complex where Zefram Cochrane is planning to launch the first warp-capable spacecraft, so it's not like they can just hang back out of the way. And most importantly of all, they succeed. They defeat the Borg and put history back on its previous course. Sure, that mini-crisis where Cochrane tries to run away without making the warp flight could have been avoided if Geordi had just kept his mouth shut about the monumental statue and the likeness of Cochrane people were gonna erect someday. But hey, Riker shoots Cochrane with a phaser to keep him from escaping, and they drag him back and force him to go through with the flight, even going so far as to stay with him aboard the spacecraft the whole time just to make sure he doesn't make a break for it again like the drunken coward he is, so it all works out. Which means you got lucky this time, Geordi. Be more careful next time you're talking to a psychologically fragile historical figure. Think about the potential consequences. You weren't like this before you got rid of the visor, man. You've changed. Everybody says so. You don't have to take my word for it. Let's talk about Deep Space Nine, which is not only my favorite Star Trek series, but also features a shit ton of time travel stories. The most well-known of these is probably Trials and Tribulations, because it doesn't just send our heroes back in time, it Forrest Gumps them into a beloved episode of classic Trek. And it actually works really well when it could easily have been a cringe-inducing mess. So bravo, people who made that episode. 23 years ago? God damn it, I am so old. Once again, I don't think we can fairly call the time travel in Trials and Tribulations reckless, at least not on the part of our heroes. Arn Darvin drags the Defiant back in time to murder Captain Kirk, which would no doubt have radically altered the course of history from that point on, but the good guys act to prevent that, and are very careful to blend in and avoid altering the timeline. Yeah, there's the gag at the end where it's revealed the promenade on DS9 is overrun with tribbles because a tribble was brought back to the 24th century by a certain changeling whose name is derived from the Cardassian translation of the Bajaran term for unknown sample, not saying who, but that's no big deal. The Klingons hunted tribbles to extinction before. They can do it again. Give Worf his mek'leth and a keg of Warnog and he'll have it sorted before roll call. For my money, the best time travel episode of DS9, one of the best time travel episodes in all of Star Trek, hell, one of the best episodes in all of Star Trek, period, is the past tense two-parter, where as a result of a transporter accident, Sisko, Bashir, and Dax are thrown back to Earth in the year 2024. Which for those characters is nearly 350 years in the past, but for viewers at the time the episode originally aired was almost 30 years in the future, and which is only about 5 years ahead of where I sit right now in 2019. Where did the time go? I was 14 when this episode aired. 14. The time travel in past tense is accidental, and Sisko, Bashir, and Dax try to minimize their impact on the timeline. The presence of Sisko and Bashir does get pivotal historical figure Gabriel Bell killed prematurely, but that's the fault of one Biddle Coleridge, not them. And Sisko successfully impersonates Bell and gets things back on track. If we really want to find a serious candidate for most reckless time traveler on Deep Space Nine, there's only one worth considering. No, not Molly. Molly's time travel didn't have any effect on history, and it was an accident. She wandered into a cave and fell into a time portal. Bratty little shit, you should listen to your parents. They'll be gone before you know it. Time moves so fast, you don't even realize it's happening, and suddenly there you are, and you're 2 months away from turning 39, and you're like, where did my life go? Quark. Quark is who I'm talking about. He's the candidate for most reckless time traveler. Yes, he, Rom, Nog, and Odo wind up on Earth in the year 1947 through no fault or intention of their own, but once Quark figures out what has happened, he immediately begins scheming to use his knowledge of the future to take control of the planet and alter history to benefit Ferengi commerce. Luckily, everyone returns to their own time before Quark has a chance to put his plan into action. Even if he was motivated by benevolence rather than personal ambition and acquisitiveness, he couldn't possibly have foreseen the results of the kind of changes he wanted to make. Maybe the Ferengi Alliance would become more prosperous? Maybe billions of people would die who didn't die in the old timeline. You can't tell. I mean, deliberately trying to change the future just because you think you can get it to come out better, that's more than recklessness. That's arrogance at an almost unimaginable level. Looks like someone's ears were burning. Like Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager had more than a few time travel episodes. Like TNG and DS9 had done, and Enterprise would do, Voyager produced an epic 2-part time travel episode, Future's End, where the ship is thrown back to Earth in the year 1996. But the really reckless time traveling doesn't start until 2 years later, when Voyager presented its 100th episode, Timeless. No one actually time travels in this episode, but much of the show is set 15 years into the future, where it turns out the only survivors of the USS Voyager's crew are Harry Kim, Chakotay, and the Doctor. An attempt to return to the Alpha Quadrant using an experimental slipstream drive succeeded in bringing Voyager most of the way home, but a slight miscalculation by Kim caused the ship to crash into an icy planet, killing everyone aboard. Now, future Harry and future Chakotay have returned to the Voyager crash site, retrieved the Doctor's holographic program, and plan to send their past selves a message so they can avoid the crash and change history. And it works, of course. Future Harry sends the message, his past self shuts down the slipstream drive just in time, and Voyager doesn't make it back to the Alpha Quadrant, but the crew doesn't die either. Which is nice for them. And future Harry's motivations are completely understandable, deeply human, even admirable. He's so overwhelmed by guilt for, as he sees it, getting his friends killed, that he's willing to erase the last 15 years of his life to undo it. But this episode sets a lousy precedent, not just for the characters, but for the show itself. The future we see during Timeless isn't the product of competing factions in a temporal Cold War. The crew of Voyager didn't die because of someone changing history. It's just what happened. And yeah, it's sad. Harry made a mistake and his shipmates died, and he's had to live with that. But that's what happened. Timeless is the first time we see a Star Trek series regular choose to alter the normal course of history because he wasn't happy with how it turned out. And it wouldn't be the last. Which brings me to the character who is actually Star Trek's most reckless time traveler. Oh, there are other characters I could mention. Nero from the first Kelvin timeline film is a good one. Sure, he's thrown into the past by accident and consumed by grief over the loss of his homeworld, but his presence does trigger the creation of an alternate timeline, and he does deliberately destroy the entire planet of Vulcan. That's some Galactic Empire shit. Not cool, Nero. And if I widen my focus to include guest characters, there's also Berlinghoff Rasmussen from the TNG episode A Matter of Time, who plans to steal items of 24th century technology and return to the 22nd century to pass them off as his own inventions. And Anarax from Voyager's Year of Hell two-parter, who uses his timeship to change all kinds of history in an attempt to restore his waning civilization and bring his dead wife back to life. But who are we kidding here? Of all the candidates from throughout the franchise, there's only one character who deserves the title of most reckless time traveler, and she earns it by doing future Harry one better in the series finale of Star Trek Voyager, Endgame. It's now the early 25th century, and the former crew of the starship Voyager are gathering together to celebrate the 10th anniversary of their return home. They all seem to be doing well. Harry is a captain, B'Elanna is a Federation liaison to the Klingon Empire, Tom is a successful author, the Doctor is married. It didn't turn out so happily for everyone, unfortunately. We learn that Tuvok is institutionalized, suffering from a degenerative neurological condition, that 7 of 9 died sometime before the ship returned to the Alpha Quadrant, and that Chakotay died shortly after the ship made it home, judging from the date on his gravestone, having lived out his final years heartbroken over the loss of 7, who he was in love with or something. They kind of threw that in right at the very end of the series. So Admiral Janeway does what any reasonable, responsible person would do in her situation. She decides to travel back in time 26 years, to the year in which the rest of Voyager's 7th season takes place, and change history so Voyager can make it back to the Alpha Quadrant much earlier than it originally did, thus saving 7's life, sparing Chakotay from having to live without her, and enabling Tuvok to seek treatment for his condition on Vulcan before it's too late. Future Janeway's motivation is sympathetic in the same way as future Harry's from Timeless, but less so. Future Harry took it upon himself to wipe out 15 years of history because everyone aboard Voyager except him, Chakotay, and the Doctor had died because of a mistake he made. Future Janeway takes it upon herself to wipe out 26 years of history where apparently everyone but 7 made it back home, and everyone who did make it back home is still happy and healthy 10 years later except for Tuvok and Chakotay. I don't mean to sound heartless here, but aside from the tragic fates of 7, Chakotay, and Tuvok, this is a pretty fantastic outcome. Voyager was lost on the other side of the galaxy, 75 years from home at maximum warp, but according to Endgame, they made it home in 23 years, most of the crew survived, and almost everyone who made it back was still alive and well a decade later. quit while you're ahead. Or no, don't quit. Keep living your imperfect, but all things considered, very good life. Of course, it's sad that Seven and Chakotay died prematurely and Tuvok developed a debilitating disease, but that's what happened. And they weren't the first members of the Voyager crew to die or be seriously injured. I can't help but notice Janeway didn't program her time machine to take her back far enough to allow her to prevent the deaths of Hogan or Carey. Or what about Stoddy and Cavett and the rest of the crew who died when the ship was first pulled into the Delta Quadrant by the caretaker? Shit, why not just go back far enough to prevent Voyager from being stranded in the Delta Quadrant in the first place? Chakotay and Seven won't end up together that way either, but they won't know the difference. Look, I get that when viewed from a certain perspective, what Admiral Janeway does in Endgame is pretty awesome. She doesn't like how things are, so she takes it upon herself to change history, and she succeeds. That's pretty badass. And while I don't think it was meant this way, it can be read as a metaphor for social activism. You don't like the way the world is? Do something about it. You think the problems we face are too big or too entrenched to solve? Try it and find out. You might be surprised by how much you can accomplish. If you look at it that way, Admiral Janeway is a goddamn inspiration, and I just want to acknowledge that before I go back to taking the piss out of her. The problem is Admiral Janeway doesn't resolve to build a better future by working to make things better in the present. She decides she can build a better present by going back and changing the past. And she's certainly not the first science fiction character to get that idea, but most of those other characters are the villains of their stories, not the heroes. The heroes are the characters who follow the villains back to stop them from changing history, like Picard and crew in Star Trek First Contact, or Kyle Reese in The Terminator, or Darian Lambert in Time Tracks. Speaking of whom, I saw Dale Midkiff at a convention a few years ago, and swear to God, the dude looks exactly the same as he did back in the day. And that was just, that was in 2012, so 7 years ago? Already? The point is, yeah, Admiral Janeway is audacious and gutsy, and she gets it done, but that doesn't mean she ought to have done it. Arbitrarily changing history because you don't like how it turned out the first time? That's more than audacity. That's hubris. And, to look at this from a writer's perspective, it establishes that doing such a thing is not only possible, but permissible in certain circumstances. That's a terrible idea because it totally undermines the stakes of any subsequent story. Whatever is done can always be undone, and it creates an inconsistency every time a writer wants to have something bad happen to their characters and make it stick. If Admiral Janeway changed history to prevent a few of her friends from dying or developing serious illnesses, why couldn't Spock or Kirk or some other character from the first Kelvin timeline film change history to prevent the deaths of billions of people when Vulcan was destroyed? Inconsistencies like that don't usually bother me because I think a particular story, especially a film, should be allowed to set its own rules and establish its own stakes regardless of what came before. But I think we all know that there are quite a few of our fellow Star Trek fans who don't see things that way and will instinctively zero in on any such inconsistency and obsess over it to the exclusion of everything else for the rest of their goddamn lives. And that can be annoying. But in this case, it could also have easily been avoided if the writers of Star Trek Voyager had just found a way to end their series that didn't involve the lead protagonist deciding to rewrite history because the first draft didn't suit her. Look, we'd all like to be able to go back in time and change things in our past. Things we're ashamed of, choices we wish we'd made differently. Hell, I'd like to think if I ever met my past self, I'd at least be able to pass on some wisdom to make my life a little easier, allow me to avoid making a few mistakes. But that's just not possible. And honestly, that's probably for the best. What the hell was that?
Hey, boy.
Dad? No, that doesn't seem right.
Like Dad would ever show up in a Star Trek video. No, shithead, I'm you. From the future.
How far in the future?
About 20 years.
How did you, meaning I, travel back in time?
Temporal vortex. Hey, think fast.
A Niners cap? What's this?
A Niners cap.
Why'd you throw it at me?
It's a gift. For me to me.
Thank you. Wow. And it's fitted. I've looked for these, but I could only ever find adjustable ones. Perfect. Where'd you get it?
From you.
And where do I get it?
From me. Just now. Wild, ain't it?
How can that be possible?
It's simple. I come back in time from the future to now and give you the hat. 20 years from now, when you're me, you travel back in time to now and give yourself the hat.
But that's a paradox.
Yep.
The sequence of events you just described is circular. You give the hat to me, I give the hat to you. But where did the hat come from?
It's like a destiny thing, maybe? We were always supposed to have the hat?
That doesn't account for how one of us got the hat in the first place. I mean, do I buy the hat at some point in my future? Before I become you and travel back in time to now?
Maybe.
What do you mean maybe? You would remember doing that. And you would have had 2 of these hats before you brought one back here to give to me. Did you have 2 of these hats?
Come on, man, I can't tell you that.
Why not?
Temporal Prime Directive. I can't give you information about your future.
You just gave me a hat from the future.
Well, there's nothing about the future written on it.
Oh, okay, forget the hat. Tell me something else about the future.
I can't. It could change my history.
Just tell me something innocuous that couldn't possibly make a difference whether I know it or not.
Okay, you live in Ohio.
Do I like it there?
Yeah, it's okay. I've just got a little place, but it's nice. Right by the sea.
You mean the lake? Right by Lake Erie?
No, the sea. Ohio is on the East Coast where I come from. This is the Atlantic Ocean.
So we weren't able to prevent the disastrous effects of climate change.
We barely even tried.
Is that why you've traveled back in time? To change history and prevent a climate change-related catastrophe that killed or displaced millions of people?
No, I just came to give you the hat.
You really traveled 20 years into the past just to give yourself a hat?
Yes, because how else would I have it?
But when you get back to your own time, you won't have it. You just gave it to me.
But I will have had it.
Do you not see how this makes no sense?
It's not supposed to make sense. It's time travel.
God, just leave. Get out of here. Go back to the future.
I'm going, but it's not because you told me to.
Just go.
It's because that's what I do now. Let me ask you something. Did this bit drag at all? Because I seem to remember when I was you, it felt like it went on forever.
You remember correctly.
All right. See you later. In the mirror.
That was weird. Though, seeing myself from the future like that? I don't know. I'm not as bothered by the passage of time as I was. I can't explain it. I feel young. I feel young. And I do like the hat.
I accomplished my mission. I gave my past self the hat.
Excellent. Everything is proceeding according to plan.
Nice. Any chance you can let me in on what the plan is?
What?
Can you tell me what the plan is?
The plan? Yeah, no, that's just something I said. It's like boilerplate villain talk. There is no plan.
Then why did you have me go back in time 20 years and give myself a hat?
Gotta use the temporal vortex for something, right?
So there's no larger purpose to any of this?
Nope.
You're just making it up as you go along.
Yep.
And this whole deal with your mysterious identity isn't going anywhere either? You don't turn out to be somebody important?
Oh, this never gets paid off at all.
Can you at least explain the hat paradox?
No.
Are you the Red Angel?
Get out.
Hey folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Trek Actually. In a minute, I'm going to let you know what the topic of the next Trek Actually video is, but first, I have a happy little bit of housekeeping to take care of. These are some of my newest Patreon patrons. Their names are Chris Penning, thank you Chris, Joe White, thank you Joe, Sean T. Macbeth, thank you Sean, Mustafa Davies, thank you Mustafa, Stevie Warp Drive, thank you Stevie, Justin Luger, thank you Justin, Angela Paris, thank you Angela, Rob Jobin, thank you Rob, question number 16, thank you question number 16, and Jamie Hanrahan. Those folks are the newest people to join my Patreon campaign by pledging $5 a month or more. Now, you can join the Patreon campaign at patreon.com/Steve Shives to help me continue making all of the videos I make on this channel by pledging $1 a month or more. You don't have to pledge $5. You can pledge anything from $1 on up, whatever you can afford, whatever you think I'm worth. But if you pledge $5 a month or more, you get yourself a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video, just like those folks just did. If you enjoy the Star Trek stuff, I want to remind you, as I always do, to listen to the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek-themed comedy podcast I co-host with the great, brilliant Jason Harding. Jason and I play low-ranking officers serving aboard a certain famous Federation starship embarking on a certain legendary 5-year mission. I think you get what I'm going for here. If you haven't listened to the Ensign's Log, you can check it out. All the links you need are in the description of this video. You can listen at the website, subscribe via RSS. If you dig my Trek Actually videos, check out the Ensign's Log. I think you'll really like it. Now, the topic for the next Trek Actually video will be something that I have received many requests for. It's something that I kind of thought I was going to be doing this time, but it didn't win the poll. The time travel subject won the poll, but this won the poll for next month's, so I'm doing it next month. The next video in the Trek Actually series will be about one of the most fascinating and multifaceted characters in all of Star Trek. He is the plain, simple tailor of Deep Space Nine, none other than Garak. The topic of the next Trek Actually video will be how Deep Space Nine actually redeems Garak. And just as a reminder, if you are a Patreon patron of mine at any level, you can vote in the poll to choose upcoming Trek Actually topics. And the next poll will be up a few hours after this video goes live, so go check my Patreon page. If you are a patron, you can vote in the poll. If you want to vote in the poll and you're not a patron, you can become a patron at any level. Patreon.com/Steve Shives gets you the right to vote for the next Trek Actually topic after the Garak show, because the Garak show is coming up in April. After that, for May, that'll be decided by the next poll. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed this one. See you next month for a brand new Trek Actually all about Garak. Bye, everybody.